Good morning. We continue our review of the conclusion of Hemshech Ayin Beis, and we're doing so now through the lens of my essay that I wrote. We began that, I think this is already the fourth class. So posted on the group, which I'm pulling up right now, is this essay. We're in the middle of page 4. Middle of page 4. So let's continue. We'll sum up what we learned, and then we'll continue on. Okay. So in this essay, I lay out, firstly, the case and the items that the Rebbe Rashab left unfinished. Questions he asked, as well as themes that he began discussing and he did not conclude. And in quite a few instances, he actually wrote, Kamoshi's bar, I will explain it, but we don't find an explanation. So in order to understand what the Rebbe Rashab may have written, I'm going over firstly a summary of the whole Ayin Beis, which I wrote up here, and reading it inside, and I'm going to continue where we left off, and then return to the end of Ayin Beis, and based on the Maimorim of Hamagbihi from the Alter Rebbe and from the Mitteler Rebbe, be able to extrapolate and piece together this puzzle. So on page 4, yesterday we reviewed mostly the third volume of the Hemshech about Einoid, and then the Yichud Mamayla Lamata through Teda, and the Rebbe Rashab's explanation of Ner Mitzvah v'Teira Eir, and the same thing Ner Hashem Nishma Sodom, and then began the discussion about Riyah, vision, eyesight, the two levels of eyesight as it manifests in the vessel that needs an outside light to illuminate the dark. That's the neshama as it comes down below. And then there's the etzem koyach hariyah, the way the power of eyesight is within the very core soul. It has all the power, no limitations, but that will not be revealed till after the soul does its work of refinement and being able to generate its own light down below, as we discussed. And so the purpose of Teira Eid is to do that illumination. Einei ha'eda are the leaders of the community, and they also serve as einayim, as eyes that guide us, as well as the angels, the malachim, who help us, especially Nefesh Habamis, to appreciate and begin to appreciate the inspiration of love and of reverence of God. Okay, then we continued that on page 1463, the Rebbe Rashab goes back to Ner Hashem Nishma Sodom. The Nefesh Halakis is informing and educating and transforming the oil of the Nefesh Habamis. So the wick is drawing from the oil of the intelligence, of the natural intelligence of the animal soul, and turning it into fire, to a fiery love. That's the third element of the Ner, the fire, the light. V'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha b'shnei yitzarecha. And I believe that's where we stopped. And when that happens, the Nefesh Habamis actually increases the light of the Nefesh Halakis. Just like a wick on its own would only burn very, very quickly and not long, whereas with the oil, it's a rich and a sustainable flame for a while. So you see the Nefesh Habamis actually feeds and fuels the Nefesh Halakis. And that's the last thing we learned inside in page, a second paragraph of page 4. Again, the pages, the PDF was posted on the group Ayin Beis, which you can print out if you like. And I'm going to read from there on. So, Behemshech lezeh mamshech. After explaining how the divine soul refines the animal soul, so then the Rebbe Rashab continues, and this is now the last 11 pages of Hemshech Ayin Beis. So I'm going to sum that up. V'zel shene. This is the actual language in Ayin Beis. Bihine. Nizbar le'il, the Rebbe Rashab writes. Now, we explained earlier, the Ner Mitzvah Yesh B'zeh Gamken Gimla and Yonim, the Shema and the Psila v'Oyer. That the Ner Mitzvah, just like Ner Hashem, Nishma Sodom, the Neshama has three elements in the candle, which is in the lamp or the candle, which is the wick, the oil, and the flame and the fire. The Ner Mitzvah also has these three things. V'lahovin Ma'u inyan Ner Mitzvah Mahe Megimlin Yonim now, and to understand what is Ner Mitzvah and what are the three elements in the mitzvah, in Ner Mitzvah. To do that, we have to first explain Yesh Levayed Oid Mashin is Bar Le'il. We have to further explain that which was discussed earlier. So just for the record, he begins to explain what he discussed earlier, but he never gets back to Ner Mitzvah. This is one of the indicators that I pointed out earlier in my essay that tells you that the Rebbe Rashab didn't finish what he began, because he says we're going to explain the three elements in what's Ner Mitzvah and what are the three elements in Ner Mitzvah, and he doesn't end up explaining. He only ends up explaining the introduction. But we will be able to piece it together from the Maimer of the Alter Rebbe and the Mitteler Rebbe, Hamagbihi l'Sheves, because there he does explain it, as we shall soon see. So the Rebbe Rashab continues to understand Ner Mitzvah and the three components of Ner Mitzvah. We have to explain further what we learned earlier, page 1454. The neshama b'yiridasa lamata. The neshama, when it comes down below, ima yes shemekabela siyur ma'malachim. So even though, like I mentioned before, it receives support and help from the malachim, because the neshama below, like the eye, cannot see in the dark, and it needs all the support it can get to be able to become a seeing eye, to be able to see. So the malachim play a role in that regard, where they help inspire. When we say Birchus Yetzer before Shema, we speak about the malachim, Kaddish, 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 the malachim, the Srafim, the Efanim, the Chayes HaKodesh, and all those details, and how they pray and they prostrate themselves to Hashem. That in turn gives power to the neshama. Bizbon is the Birchus Yetzer, in the contemplation of Birchus Yetzer. So even though you could say malachim are not visible, but we contemplate on it. We daven, we say Birchus Yetzer, and we're asked to imagine the servants or the ambassadors of the king are praying to him, and they are passionate and inspired and in a fiery, passionate state. Nevertheless, even though those malachim do provide support to the neshama, we also learned the actual refinement and repair of the animal soul, to illuminate it, and to impact on it, this bittul, to integrate and internalize this sublimation of the animal soul, which on its own is driven by self-interest of its own needs. So we learn very clearly on page 1454 that even though the malachim support, but support doesn't mean they're doing the job for us. When you're lifting a weight and someone helps and supports you, that doesn't mean they're replacing you. They're just helping you to be able to lift the weight. And the same thing in Avodas Hashem. When a teacher or a mentor or a Rebbe, for that matter, supports and helps your effort, that doesn't take away your responsibility. On the contrary, it is your responsibility, but they are helping you achieve what you need to achieve. That's true support. So it's b'koyach atzmei shel neshama. In other words, if the neshama did not have this power, the malachim would not be able to do it for us, because the malachim were not given this mission. It's our mission, but Hashem, in His benevolence, gave us support system, like we discussed, the cosmic support system, and they support our effort. So it's b'koyach atzmei shel neshama. And now comes the Rebbe Rashab and says, but we need to understand now, ulahovin zeh, and to understand this idea, mipnei mahu b'koyach neshama dafke. Why does the neshama dafke have this power? What power does it have to create bittul in the nefesh habamis. It's a very powerful thing because, like we said, like he's going to say in a moment, so the neshama has this power. The malachim support it, as do the Einei Ha'eda and so on, but it's still our power. So question number here, another question, what is the koyach neshama dafke? This too he doesn't answer. So there's another indicator, as I pointed out earlier in the list of questions that I made, that it doesn't answer. And then comes another question. And how is the neshama capable to affect such a level of selflessness and bittul when the nefesh habamis should be taken for yeshes the neiga hepech habitl gamri. The nefesh habamis on its own is an intensely driven by its own self and its own ego, its own yeshes, its own substance, you can say, its own identity of neiga, klipas neiga, hepech habitl gamri, the diametric opposite of bitl. And here comes a neshama to a nefesh habamis and says, through Shema Yisrael, and as we're going to learn soon, the details, it can affect the nefesh habamis. How? So it's a double question. Why is it dafke b'keich neshama? And how is it capable of doing it when you're dealing with a nefesh habamis that's like a diametric opposite? To put it in simple terms, how can you convince and inspire something that is your enemy, so to speak, that is not interested and has its own interests? That's the questions on the table here. Now, as I said, these questions are not answered in Ayin Beis. The Rebbe Rashab is going to go into a lengthy discussion on the contemplation of Shema Yisrael, and Yichud Ilah, Yichud Tata, and the Yichud of both of them, but it doesn't answer these questions. But let's continue reading the Rebbe Rashab's language, and then you'll see how now we're weaving it with this. Will be entering into the zone of what the Rebbe Rashab answers and what remains that we need to figure out what the answer would be. So the Rebbe Rashab continues. So to understand these things, he said a few things. So we have the question, what's ner mitzvah? What are the three components in a mitzvah? We have the question, what is the koyach of the, why does the neshama have this power? What is this power of the neshama to transform the animal soul? And finally the question, how can it do so when the animal soul is its diametric opposite? So with that, he says, Yesh lahagdim tchila. To understand that, we need to make yet another preface. So you see here a preface upon a preface upon a preface. The hagdim tchila, inyan ha-krishma. What is the inyan of Krishma? The parsha d'sheina eimer v'hafta b'chol levavcha b'shnei yitzadecha. Remember, how do we lead the animal soul to loving God? It's what we say in v'hafta, which comes from Shema. So v'hafta is a continuation of Shema. So in order to understand how to affect the animal soul, b'chol levavcha b'shnei yitzadecha, to love God when it's the opposite of its nature, we need to understand first, what is Shema? That how do we get to the love that the animal soul also can love God? That's through the Yichud Elyon, the higher unity, which is indicated in the first verse, the first and second verse of Shema. Shahu, hayichud yichud love yichud tata b'Shema u'baruch Shem. That this is through the yichud love of Shema and Baruch Shem yichud tata. So we need to understand the higher level of unity and the lower level of unity. Then we can come back and understand how it affects the animal soul and why dafka the neshama does so. And then from there we can move to ner mitzvah and so on. But the first thing we have to address is how does it affect the animal soul? At kan l'shene. So this is an exact citation, the last 6-7 lines from Ayin Beis page. It's page, let's see, what page is it? $1460, I think it's page 1463 probably. Yeah, 1463. Good. Okay. So now, here's what I'm writing. This was the actual language of the Rebbe. Umamshech levayer. The Rebbe Rashab then continues to explain, what does he say after this opening, this introduction? Barichus teichen his bonus the mitzvahs yichud b'krishma. He continues to explain at length It's 11 pages actually. What is the content of the contemplation when we do the mitzvah of Yichud Hashem Echad in Shema? And he explains the three levels. Yichud Tata, the Yichud Hashem Echad, as in the Yichud of the taking existence and connecting it to its source, the divine creator that created existence. Yichud Elah, the divine that's beyond existence, v'chibur shneim, and the joining of both of them. That's what he goes on to explain the next 11 pages, which we just finished learning a few days ago. Ubir zeh nimshech at sefer Hemshech she'higia eleinu. And this explanation extends and continues till the end of the Hemshech that has reached us, which means the end as we have it in our sefer here on page 1477 in the printed Ayin Beis. Aval kanira, like we've been discussing, but it's obvious, it seems shelo yistaya l'sayim ha'inyan, they didn't have time to finish the subject, ulataret shaylas hanal, and to answer the above mentioned questions, as mentioned before in number 6, when we talked about the questions that he left unanswered. Just want to see if that actually no. Okay. Good. Before I continue, are there any questions? Okay. Ulam, however, Kemavur Lialat explained earlier, the Hemshech Ayin, the continuation, thank God, and the answers to these questions, we can find them in the Maimer B'dibra Mastal Hamagbihi L'Shavas B'Teira B'Kitzer. There it's more brief. U'B'Maimori Admuram Soi Barucha. And the Mitteler Rebbe's Maimer at length. In the Maimer, the Chanukah Maimer mentioned before, Hamagbihi L'Shavas. Okay. So now what we're going to do is actually quote from those Maimorim and see how they answer the question based on what the Rebbe Rashab explained till here. So we can continue by reading those Maimorim, and I'm going to quote actual quotes from those Maimorim. But before we do so, I write, Koidim shemitzatetim biyurim elu, before we cite these explanations from the Alter Rebbe and the Mitteler Rebbe, kedai lahashris nusach hashay lekan, it's worthwhile comparing the language that the Rebbe Rashab uses here in Ayin Beis, this question, La nusach shel Admur HaZoken b'Teira, to the text, to the language that the Alter Rebbe uses in Teira, and the Mitteler Rebbe, Maimori Admur Hamsoi. They ask a similar question. How can a neshama affect an animal soul when the animal soul is a yesh? So the Rebbe Rashab used a precise expression. What I'm going to do now is compare it to the expression how the Alter Rebbe asked the question and how the Mitteler Rebbe asks. This will surely help, but it's still good to see when you're discussing the whole subject. You want to really see how they spell it out. So Hemshech Ayin Beis nusach hashaylahu, we just learned what is the language in the question in Ayin Beis. How is the neshama capable of impacting or affecting bittul in the animal soul? When the animal soul on its own is intensely consumed with its own yeshus, its own existence, the exact opposite of bittul. Bittul means that you're subjugated, that you're selfless, you are suspend yourself in the face of something greater than yourself, God, Hashem. Yeshus is the opposite of bittul. So that's the language of the question in Ayin Beis. B'hisofa ala shayla kedemis, which is in addition, just repeating the question before that, he asked, Mipnei mahu b'keich haneshama dafke. Why is it dafke in the power of the neshama? Now, let's compare this to the language in Teira. The Teira, Lamed Ches Amud Beis, Lashon Hashaylahu, the way he phrases, the question is a little different. Same idea, but the language is a bit different. L'cheira eina muvan, says the Alter Rebbe. Seemingly, it's not understood. Eich yoshev hayetzer hara la'aves havaya ayedei adam. How can you cause the Yetzer Hara to turn and love God through the person? V'haloi lo yishmei love. It won't listen to the person. That's the way the Alter Rebbe puts it. And we could analyze why the Rebbe Rashab changed the language, but regardless, the content is the same. The Rebbe Rashab adds the word of Yeshus, the Hepech HaBitl. The Alter Rebbe puts it very, very balabatish in a way. How can you expect the Yetzer Hara to love God? A person should affect that. Well, it won't listen to him. That's the language of the Alter Rebbe. What about the Mitteler Rebbe? So the Mitteler Rebbe actually, in his classic style of elaborating, he actually brings three different ways how he expresses the question. Because it extends over a number of pages by the Mitteler Rebbe. So we continue now. What does the Mitteler Rebbe write? In the Maimer Admuram Tzoy Chanukah, where he brings this Maimer, he brings the content of this question three different times, and here are the different expressions he uses. B'seif Omid Shin Samar Gimel. B'seif Omid Shin Samar Gimel. At the end of page 363, this is Maimer Admuram Tzoy, the Mitteler Rebbe's Maimerim, which we learned, and I think we posted also on ayinbeis.com. He says, Ach be'emes l'chayri yesh lahavin. But in truth, we need to understand, seemingly need to understand, the mehechen yesh koyach b'neshama. Where does the neshama have power? L'hafich l'teva hara de nefesh tivis. To transform the nature, to transform the negative or evil personality of the natural soul, Shua Nikri Yetzer Hara, which is called the evil inclination, Shura Mitchilas Habriya, that is evil from its beginning, from its inception, from its creation. Ma'acha Shenikri Yetzer Hara, the fact that it's called Yetzer Hara, Yetzer Hara, which means the evil inclination. Shemashmoi, when you say Yetzer Hara, Yetzer from the word Yitzira means it's been shaped that way, it's been formed and defined that way. Shemashmoi Shemitzirose V'Toldose means from its inception and from its birth, from its outset, it's Bebchinas Ra Gomor, Yetzer Hara. It's Ra Gomor. In other words, it's not superimposed, it's not acquired, it's something inherent in the Yetzer Hara, which only intensifies the question. How do you have the power to transform its natural inclination, which is to selfishness and ultimately to evil? That's the language in the first expression in the Mitteler Rebbe's Maimer. Later, B'Reish Amid Shema Ayin Beis, the top of page 372, he phrases it this way. Achine yesh lahavin. However, we need to understand, ma'ayin yesh koyach la'adam. Where does a person have the power to arrive at such a high level of the divine soul, that he rises to such a level to the point he can transform the faculties of the animal soul, its in intelligence and its emotions, even from evil to good, which is called the transforming of darkness to light. So again, the similar question, just again phrased a bit differently, same content. And finally, the third time he addresses this question is on page Shin Ayin Daled, 374. There he says, Ma'ata yesh lahavin be'ikerin habirin hazeh. Now we need to understand in this primary refinement shanefesh alikis tuchel levar lenefesh habamis, that the divine soul has the power to refine the animal soul, Ad sheyuchel liyas b'ispilus ha'ava av b'yetzer hara. To the extent that it could affect the stimulation of love also in the Yetzer Hara. So it's not phrased as a question, but it's phrased as this is the chiddush here, the ability of the neshama to achieve that, the nefesh l'kis to achieve that. So what we have here is simply a comparison of the way the question is phrased by the Rebbe Rashab, the way it's phrased by the Alter Rebbe, and the three different ways the Mitteler Rebbe addresses it. Okay. Now we still have to have the answer. We don't have the answer yet. So slowly we're going to develop it. Any questions before I continue?
Rabbi, I have a question. If the animal, how can an animal soul, how can a soul be inherently evil? I don't understand that. You say it was created that way.
Yeah, it means it's created as a selfish entity that does not sense and feel its source, and that is the root of evil.
But doesn't that just inherently contradict the word soul? I mean,
it's not called that. It's called the animal soul, not the divine soul.
I know, but
so the animal soul is created like an animal to take care of its own needs and interests.
Okay, but you said it's evil. It's created evil.
That's selfishness is the root of all evil. If there was no concealment, then the animal soul would never be able to do anything evil.
Okay.
It begins with a self-contained ego and self-interest. Self-interest is one step. That's what he means here by evil.
Okay. Thank you.
Obviously, it can be transformed. That's what we're discussing here. It can be tamed and trained and restrained and also transformed. But that's through work. On its own, it's created in order to serve its needs. So when you're hungry, your body tells you it's hungry. That's the nefesh habamis at work.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. So let's continue. Niska le'il. Now he goes on and says, it was mentioned earlier. The theme of the last 11 pages of the conclusion of Ayin Beis, from page 1466 to the end of 1477. Now, what is the theme there? It's an explanation of the contemplation of divine unity. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. And this explanation is based on, and in a number of places, it's actually citing the actual language of the Maimer Hamagbihi L'Sheves from the Mitteler Rebbe, page 374 and on, which in turn is based on the Maimer of the Alter Rebbe, 38b and c. And what is the content? So we're going to know, briefly sum up what he says. And then the Rebbe Rashab will stop at some point. But the Alter Rebbe, Mitteler Rebbe will continue, and that's what we're going to do now. So he says like this, V'teichene is bonnusu. And what is the content of this contemplation? Shebe'emes kol mitzias ha'elam hu elikus. That in truth, all of existence is really divine energy. Ubezeh yesh gimel madreges ba'yichud. And this realization has three levels in the unification between God and existence. One, yichud tata, the lower unity, shemitzad erelikia mislabish ben Evrayim al yidei tzimtzum, that the divine energy that manifests within existence, within the creations, through the concealment, which is called mamala kalam, the divine energy within existence. Yesh mitzias ha'elam, there is an existing world, an existence. V'hu batel elikus. However, this existence is sublimated and nullified, or you could say subjugated to godliness. The art recognizes the artist. That's the yichud number one. Two, yichud elah. Shemitzadera lekisha lifnei tzimtzum. That from the perspective of the divine energy pre-tzimtzum, not the way it's mitzumtzum and diminished according, commensurate and tailored to existence. She'ena be'erecha elamis, which is infinitely distant from the world, from existence, sevav kalalmin. Ein mitzias le'elamis klal. There's no room and there's no significance to existence at all, in contrast to the first level of Yichud Tata. And three is the third realization, L'gabe ha'atzmus ein ha'tzimtzum master klal. From the perspective of Atzmus, the tzimtzum does not conceal altogether, and therefore, v'hu miyachid beizeh yichudim the yichud tov v'yichud elah. So therefore, it miyachid both. It's not just two perspectives, because the tzimtzum doesn't affect Atzmus in any way. There's nothing concealed. So the yichud that exists before the tzimtzum and the yichud after the tzimtzum are all like one. Shekol mitzias elmas v'kol mashenisava, all the existence and all that was created, hakol b'chinas hamshachim in ha'atzmus u'miyuchad bo yizbarach b'tachlis hayichud. Everything is hamshachim from atzmus and utterly united, seamlessly united with atzmus. U'mesayim ha'hemshech. This is what this summed up 11 pages that followed the beginning with the Shema Yisrael. And then the last words of the Hemshech goes like this. V'ze'in Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. This is the meaning of Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad in Shema. Hashem Elokeinu b'chinas yichud elah, v'Hashem Echad yichud tata, the two expressions. V'shneim heim b'posek echad, and both are included in one verse. They're not separate verses. Hu l'mahava echad be'echad, meaning create one, the unity of one goes together with the unity of the second. Shagam yichud tato b'chinas yichud k'mo yichud elah mamish chulu. That also the lower level of unity is the same level of unity as the higher level from this third perspective of Atzmus. And that's why they're both in one verse, because it's indicating on the third ultimate unity of both levels of unity. And that continues. Upa nigmar hemshech shalafanenu. And here is where the hemshech stops. The one that before us, that we have before us, the hemshech that we have in our hands, this is where it stops. But now let's see, what does it say in the Alter Rebbe Maimer and the Mitteler Rebbe's Maimer. I'm going to begin with the Mitteler Rebbe's Maimer because the Rebbe Rashab has been quoting more of the Mitteler Rebbe and it's more elaborate. And we're going to go back soon to see what the Alter Rebbe says. But the Alter Rebbe is just more summarized. So he says, Aval Bedrush Hamagbihi Hanal. But the Maimer Hamagbihi Hanal, which all this about the Yechudim is based upon, pages 386 and 390. Mamshich Levayir, he continues to explain where the Ayin Beis stops, the Mitteler Rebbe and the Alter Rebbe continue. Mitaretz continues to explain and to answer Hashayla, the question that was asked, U'Mesayim Ha'inyan, and he finishes the entire topic. So basically, the Rebbe Rashab stopped in middle, whatever reason, did not continue writing. But if you look in the Maimon of the Mitteler Rebbe, you see everything the Rebbe Rashab says plus more. So it doesn't take a big leap to say that the Rebbe Rashab, had he continued, that's what he would have quoted. We don't know the extent. So therefore, he explains, and what does he say? Asher al-yedei zbonon zu, the Mitteler Rebbe says, and the Alter Rebbe, that through this contemplation that we just discussed, 11 pages in Ayin Beis, the Parsha Reshena de Krishma, in the first chapter in Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, B'seichel anushi v'ateva shel nefesh habamis, that through this contemplation, when you do it with using and it's understood in the mind, the natural mind of the animal soul, the shemen, the oil, toil nefesh halikis. So this is bonus. The nefesh, through this bonus, this contemplation, the divine soul affects also the animal soul. Shegam HaNefesh Abam is Yovin, Achdus, that also the animal soul would understand this level of unity, Ad Sheyovi Lispailus Ha'ava, to the point that it will become excited and stimulated by this love. And it'll be consumed like the oil, consumed by the wick, to create the flame of the love of God. And it'll be encompassed in the flame or light of the love, the nefesh alikis, of the divine soul. As the pasuk continues after Shema and Baruch Shem, love God with both sides of your heart, with Shnei Yetzerecha, also the Yetzer Hara. So that's what the Mitteler Rebbe explains. And V'zel Shene, now I'm going to actually quote actual expressions from the Mitteler Rebbe, not brief. I elaborated here because I wanted to have as much as we can. Everything the Mitteler Rebbe says now is going to help us. This is the next three let me see, one, two, yeah. Oh, more, four paragraphs. Two, three long paragraphs are now going to be a quote straight from Mitteler Rebbe. Why? Because since the Rebbe Rashab did not continue writing, I thought appropriate, let's quote everything the Mitteler Rebbe says. Now, what the Rebbe Rashab would have done, how much of it would he have quoted? How much would he have explained? How much would he have left out? That is speculation. But we definitely can stand on as I said, on the solid bridge, solid foundation of the Mitteler Rebbe's language here, as he explains how the hisbonenus, how does the contemplation of the nefesh alikis in divine unity on all three levels, how does that ultimately impact the animal soul, that it too should understand it and come to Ava, not just understand it, but to actually cause it to love God against its very nature, which was the initial question that he asked. And as I said, the Ayin Beis doesn't answer the question explicitly, but the Mitteler Rebbe does, and so does the Alter Rebbe, which we'll read afterwards in brief. So that's what I'm going to do now. Continue now the Mitteler Rebbe, Zelasheni, the actual language of the Mitteler Rebbe. Any questions before I start reading the Mitteler Rebbe's piece? Now, remember, we did learn this Mitteler Rebbe already. We learned the whole Maimer. But now I'm only lifted and citing only the language relevant to our discussion here. Any questions? Okay. So let's continue. V'hinei, this is now language of the Mitteler Rebbe. The next three paragraphs. V'hinei, says the Mitteler Rebbe, Mitam zeh, hu she'amar achash ma Yisrael v'haftas Hashem b'chol avavcha b'shnei yitzarecha. For this reason, what reason? The reason that he spoke about earlier, the levels of Hashem Echad, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, Yichud Tata, Yichud Ilah, and they're both in one pasuk. So he says, now we'll understand the reason that following that we say, and love your God with both sides of your heart. So the Mitteler Rebbe is going to explain why. And again, this is literally, if you place this at the end of Ayin Beis, it flows smoothly, very easily. It's a new paragraph. But Ayin Beis concludes with a Yichud, the three levels of Yichud, and now comes the next section. So it's very likely this would have been the actual language of the Rebbe Rashab. Again, we can't know that definitively. Yeah. So he says, the Hainu, this means, once we know there's the power of the comprehension of Bina in the mind and the heart of the divine soul, to recognize and to understand all this, this is Mitteler Rebbe's language. It's a little different than Ayin Beis. The language is very classic Mitteler Rebbe. So once we come to recognize and understand the true divine unity, ba'atzmus alakus, like we said, the true divine unity is not just Yichud Tata, Yichud Elah, and the Yichud of both of them, gam achar ha'ishtalshelus. Not only how it is before the Tzimtzum, before Ishtalshus, but also after Ishtalshus. The Ein Shini Lefon of Klal Canal. And he's referring to what he said earlier. There's no Shini at all, because by the Eibishter Atzmus, the Tzimtzum doesn't have any impact. So there's no difference, Ani Rishon, Ani Achren. So exactly as the divine unity is before the Tzimtzum, so it is after the Tzimtzum from God's perspective. And that's because Havaya and Elokeinu are mamish, b'bechinas pnimis, v'atzmus mamish, ain't called Helen v'Hester master canal. Because both Havaya and Elokeinu are mamish like one. Pnimis and atzmus, because there's no Helen v'Hester. In the language that we said before, there's no tzimtzum at all, canal. So once you have that level of comprehension, the Nefesh Elikis continues the Mitteler Rebbe. And the dots just indicate that I didn't cite every word because some of it was either more elaborate or a little tangential. I just focused on what's relevant to us. So for this very reason, the Nefesh Elikis has arrived to this understanding and appreciation of the seamless divine unity. That for this very reason, that the divine soul has reached such a level of understanding, that's why from this Gili Er Asoga, this profound revelation in the divine soul's understanding of godliness, due to its source in Shema Vaya, in Torah mitzvahs, so this can also extend Gam B'Seichel Nefesh Abamis, or Nefesh Ativis, that also the animal soul's mind can understand it. Afal Pisha Tiva Beheper Gomor, even though, like we said earlier, its nature, the animal soul's nature on its own is diametrically opposite. Lahasi Kol Geshem V'Nifrid Canal. Its mind is all focused on understanding everything that's material and separate from God, meaning its own self-contained ego and its own self-interest. But kol mokim, nevertheless, through the illumination of this divine revelation, this divine epiphany, being that it comes from higher than Ishtalshlus, meaning higher than the root, like he says, higher than the root even of the animal soul. Then the thick, or you could say the crass darkness, a natural darkness of the animal soul on its own, which on its own is human intelligence and it has a heart of flesh. Yaskim, nevertheless, due to this understanding of the Nefesh Elikis, Yaskim Gam Hu V'Yede Ala Emes. The animal soul will also agree and acknowledge the truth that the Nefesh Elikis has arrived at. And he continues explaining how that happens. Ki Hari Onuroyim, because we see Shema Oris Eira Emes Hazeh B'Nefesh Elikis, that when this light of truth of the divine soul is shining, is illuminating b'seichel v'das eliki, with a divine intelligence and perception, yutfezeh le'emes gomer gam b'seichel anushi. So when it's really explained well, it's something that also human intelligence can appreciate, like we discussed. That when you explain the idea of divine unity in a logical way, also the natural mind can understand it and grasp it. That it too will be driven and be compelled to this truth, because that's the nature of truth. Truth illuminates and directs and guides the way. So when a person, let's say, is wandering in the dark and they're confused and don't know where they are, when you shine a light, it gives them guidance. Not just the animals, the divine soul. So even the animal soul, where on its own, it's consumed with its own interests, but when you give it guidance and you say, here is the purpose of your life, here is what is the true reality of your life and of existence. It too gets illuminated. Like it says that even darkness is not dark before him, before God. But it also means that since darkness is not a concealer, and if that can be conveyed into from the seichel of the nefesh elikis to the nefesh habamis can also acknowledge it and accept it. Now he's going to go on to explain this in more detail, the Rebbe and Mitteler Rebbe style. It will need some explanation because the Mitteler Rebbe style is a little denser usually and harder to understand. But I'm just thinking whether I should stop here because I don't want to stop in the middle of a sentence. It looks like a good place to stop. He's going to explain this further, but I think I'm going to stop here because the next section is a little more complicated. But we'll do that in the next class. I'm going to stop in the middle of the paragraph on page, I think we're on page 5 now. Yeah. Middle of the paragraph. I know it's a middle, but it's a good place to stop because the Mitteler Rebbe goes on and explains this further. So we're seeing here the beginning of the explanation that after understanding Yichud well, and it's explained for 11 pages by the Rebbe Rashab. It's not 11 pages, I don't know if it's 11 pages by the Mitteler Rebbe, I think it's less. But that explanation is not just for the Nefesh Elikis. It's an explanation that Nefesh Habamis could also understand. The animal soul could understand, for example, that the Tzimtzum does not affect God. It's a logical statement. It could understand that the Yichud, Tato, Yichud Ilah are all one. So the more you expose the Nefesh Habamis to truth, and Chassidus does that, the more capable you are of taming and ultimately transforming the animal soul. That's just summing up the beginning of what he said. He's going to elaborate more, and obviously we'll analyze it and discuss it. But we are getting here now the answer to the one big question that he asked on page 1463. 1463. How is it possible to affect and transform an animal soul whose whole being is driven by yeshus? And in a way, you could also say this is the ultimate answer. How do you transform the tzimtzum? Because this is transformation. This is not bypassing, it's not overriding, it's not ignoring. It's the transformation of tzimtzum. And in volume 2, he said tzimtzum and avodah is the nefesh habamis. Because nefesh habamis personifies and embodies concealment on its own. But here we're getting a process through avodah sa'adam. Because it's dafka the avodah of the neshama that does this, that through this bonus and Shema, you can begin to pierce and ultimately transform the animal soul to love God. So that's what we're now literally in the midst of understanding that answer. But there's more to go. As I said, I'll stop here, middle of the paragraph, in the middle of page 5. This is my essay, which is now in a PDF form that you can check out on the group. We'll ultimately post it on ayinbeis.com as well. Are there any questions?
So that means since the nefesh elikis that is also in a seichel of a human being could understand this a tzimtzum, the soge of Odom, the Ein Sof, Mimele Shaykh also that the nefesh habamis should also be able to do that. Correct?
Yeah, that's exactly what, correct.
I think he's saying more than that. He's saying that those contemplations are obvious to the neshama when it's focused on its source, etc. Those observations are not. It's not difficult for the neshama to embrace those, or it's a manifestation in a sense of those observations. So the animal intellect, nefesh bahamas or seichel enoshi, is then able to say, I see, with its intellect, with logic, to understand what comes naturally to the nefesh bahamas. What comes naturally to the neshama doesn't come naturally to the nefesh bahamas, but it can come to it by reason of its intellect, by reason of its logic. When it comes to understand how the neshama sees things, can say, I see, I can't deny this truth. That makes sense to me. and therefore it becomes transformed. It's not like if the neshama can do it, so can the nefesh habahamis. I think it's more than that. It's saying the neshama, these truths are part of it, are essential to it, are natural for it. They're not. It's not difficult for the neshama to acknowledge these truths. Is that what would you say, Rabbi Jacobson?
I wouldn't say necessarily that it's not easy. I think the nefesh elokis also has to struggle and work with it. However, it's not a nefesh habamis, it's divine by nature. So the way I would phrase it is something like this. Shema Yisrael is not just for the nefesh habamis, it's also for the nefesh elokis. Shema Yisrael is the process of the divine soul leading the way, so to speak, by davening, all the levels of davening that reach to Shema. Then you say Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. The contemplation of the divine soul goes into all these levels of yichud. That through learning Chassidus, we just learned 11 pages, which is the nefesh elokis contemplating on it. And while it's contemplating, being that the nefesh elokis, like we learned earlier, is one with the nefesh habamis, because that's the way Hashem made it. If you remember, they become literally like one. That the very seichel of the nefesh elokis is manifesting the seichel of nefesh habamis. So the seichel of nefesh habamis is participating in this contemplation. Now, the worst case scenario would be if the nefesh habamis doesn't let the nefesh elokis contemplate and disturbs it and distracts it and doesn't let it contemplate on Shema. But assuming that nefesh elokis is in control and focusing, the nefesh habamis is immediately starting to benefit from this seichel and from this contemplation. Obviously, the nefesh elokis is easier because it's naturally divine. It's like a fish in water. But like he says in Tanya, during davening, you have more koyach and more power to do so, because nefesh elokis, during the rest of the day, struggles with the animal soul. Sometimes the animal soul wins. But as I said, we're talking about davening, focused davening. So nefesh elokis is now running the show, so to speak. Nefesh habamis, meanwhile, is starting to understand and appreciating, because his bonus of nefesh elokis is in the language of the nefesh habamis. If you go back a few pages in Ayin Beis, I think 1461, if I recall correctly, he says clearly that he uses examples from science, I use the word science, from nature, from things the animal soul will understand. So the language on these pages that we're learning is not just nefesh elokis language, it's nefesh habamis language as well. It's nefesh elokis language using metaphors and examples and a language that the animal soul could understand. Just like right now, I'm speaking in English in a way that an animal soul can understand these words. So ultimately, it affects the nefesh habamis. I'm just elaborating a bit more on this, on the topic, the way I would frame it. So it's not wrong what anybody said here. I'm just adding my own way of phrasing it.
Thank
So
you.
it's
But
Thank you.
what you said is because the nefesh elokis, how the nefesh elokis able to get it because of the tzimtzum, because in the sheresh, the nefesh elokis before the tzimtzum is having it, so memela after the tzimtzum, the nefesh elokis is getting it. And since the nefesh habahamis and the nefesh elokis are like one, so the nefesh elokis could convince also the nefesh habahamis. The nefesh elokis cannot convince nefesh habahamis of a goy l'moshel because it's not one with the neshama. Correct?
Not necessarily what you just said. We're not talking about goy here. He didn't make the distinction between a non-Jew and a Jew. Generally speaking, he is talking about Shema Yisrael. He's talking about a Yid davening. But that's another discussion. I don't want to talk about non-Jews right now, because the fact is non-Jews could also understand these deep levels of unity. So clearly
Understand
they could
what feeling also?
Why not? Relative to them. Just like in Jews itself.
Relative to them, right.
Yeah, but Jews is also relative. Not all of us feel the same way. Anyway, I don't want to discuss Jew and non-Jew because it's a really separate subject. It'll be confusing. Let's finish what we're learning here. Then I could discuss how a non-Jew may experience on their level these ideas as well. But for all practical purposes, before the tzimtzum, after the tzimtzum, I would wait to see how the Mitteler Rebbe explains it before we make any conclusions. What we've said so far, is quite straightforward. The nefesh elokis is concealed when it comes down below. However, it's still naturally godly and divine. With avodah, namely here tefillah, Shema, and all of tefillah, the nefesh elikis comes alive and gets its fans get deflamed, and while it's doing so, it's engaging and influencing the animal soul. And that's where we get to V'ahavta es Hashem Elokecha. But as I said, there's more to read, and I would like to read inside everything Mitteler Rebbe says, then to analyze it more.
Rabbi, I have a question.
On this topic? On this topic or something else?
Exactly about what you just said. If Mitteler Rebbe was, so to say, the starting point for Rabbi Rashab, why he didn't finish, give his conclusion at the end? Why
the Rebbe Rashab?
Yes. Why?
Maybe because he ran out of time. Because he simply didn't have the time.
Maybe there was another reason. I see there's two reasons. Either he didn't want just to plagiarize and just
No, absolutely not.
Or maybe.
Well, let me just rule that out altogether, because if that's the case, he shouldn't quote them altogether. It's not plagiarizing. All the Rabbeim quote the Rabbeim before. There's no plagiarizing in Chassidus, number one. Number two, it's very clear that he asked questions and he didn't answer them. The only reason is time. I don't see any other reason.
Maybe.
Go ahead. What's your other theory?
I have a theory that he tried to find something more radical as an opposite to this.
What's your basis for that? What's your proof?
I want to answer to rationale my answer just because of the time when Rebbe Rashab lived, and he saw the difference between Nefesh Elokim and Nefesh Habagamis in practice, in blood that was spilled when Jews participate in all of this. He might find different.
Okay, so let me just say this. My expertise tells me that your theories don't have any validity, and they definitely don't have evidence. Simply put, the Rebbe Rashab did not have the time to continue. He would have continued. It's not uncommon. We have discourses written by the Rabbeim, and they didn't finish them. It's not the only time it's happened. So unless you have a black and white evidence otherwise, that is the most likely reason. You want to speak about your own theories in general, fine, but it doesn't have anything to do with, my opinion, any legitimate explanation for this. Why would the Rebbe Rashab not answer questions he asked? He wrote 1,400 pages. You know how much of it is from Chassidus, and he asked questions. Of course he would have answered. He always answers questions, and why wouldn't he? And not just these questions. There are questions that go back to the beginning of the Hemshech. I brought 7 different proofs from earlier in the Hemshech where he said, I will explain it, and he didn't explain it. So it's very clear he was very much planning to do so. So the only explanation is time. And it's upheaval. So I just have to say it very adamantly, because I'm saying it with my authority here. It's not a theory by me.
I understand. If he followed Mitteler Rebbe,
it's not the Mitteler Rebbe, it's the Alter Rebbe.
It would take a lot of time to finish to answer according to Mitteler Rebbe.
Okay, listen. Let's take this offline, because I just cannot agree with what you're saying, and it's just not correct from my point of view. So I just want to make that clear. So let me stop here. Are there any other questions? You want to discuss this? We could discuss it later. Any other questions?
Yeah, I do. If I could just ask Rabbi, 2 things. So you're saying that the intellect of the Nefesh HaBahamis can actually be transformed by our avoda. That's really what's going on here. That's how the Nefesh Elokis influences it. That's number one. And number 2 is the Mitteler Rebbe said that in the face of truth, that the that nobody, like even the Nefesh Habahamis, cannot dispute that. So that's the reason
He doesn't
for
say cannot dispute it. He says
No.
it will agree. It will understand.
It will agree. It will agree. Sorry, and that's the reason we learn Torah, right? Because Torah is truth, and
That's
so
the reason we say Shema. We contemplate on the divine unity in Shema.
But also, since Torah is truth,
He's not talking about that here. Here he's not discussing that.
Okay.
You want to extend it to that? You could extend it to that. Right now, he's talking about the contemplation of the divine unity. The way I would put it is very straight. It's like oil. The oil of the animal soul is intelligence that can be used for its own survival, or it can be turned into fuel for the divine. This happens all the time. When a scientist or any intelligent person has used their intelligence to make the world a better place, or to do a mitzvah, a good deed, they've transformed the animal soul's self-interest into something that is serving divine interest. Just think of it very practically.
Yeah.
You see it all the time. Not everyone does it, obviously. And if everyone did it, we'd have Mashiach here already. But that is the idea of taking the mind and the faculties that are driven by self-interest and money and power and harnessing it toward higher purposes.
So it's really about where you put your attention, and in other words.
That's why the way we do it, in the way Judaism has set it up, that's why we have a prayer every morning. We say Shema, and Shema follows prayers before it. It's a whole journey of introspection and soul searching and contemplation on higher states of consciousness and unity that help the animal soul then appreciate that.
Okay, thank you.
One way I look at it, Robin, if I just may add, this has helped me think about it, the centrality of Shema in all of Yiddishkeit. First of all, it's one of the most frequently stated prayers, if you will. It's an ancient prayer. It's self-effectuating, if you will. It takes time to learn really the details with Chassidus and all that, but essentially it's about the unity of God. That's where Yiddishkeit begins, with the existence of God and the unity of God. So the fact that it's so ubiquitous in our worship, in our divine service, we pray about all kinds of other things too, but this is one of, if not the most ubiquitous, frequent contemplations in Judaism. So then you can see how it is actually a central aspect of avoda, and Torah too. But Torah hits all different sorts of topics. This pasuk, or these two psukim, are about one concept, pardon the pun, which is about God's unity, and it's very ubiquitous. It's central. It's not just a peripheral prayer, right? What do we say? God forbid, before we think we're going to die, we say Shema. We say we say it whatever, I don't know, at least 3 times. I don't count how many times, but you say it in Shachris. You say it twice in Shachris. You say it once in Mariv, and you say it before you go to sleep. There's 4 times right there. So I think
you're asking something. You're just making a statement.
I'm trying to say to help her to see how it helped me see how this is so central. If you go back in Ayin Beis, he said it explicitly several times. On page 1466, he said these words: "Klolos mitzvahs hakrishma mitzvahs yichud is the klolos of all mitzvahs. It's the foundation of all mitzvahs. That's why yichud kudshabricha v'shchinti yesod kol ha-mitzvahs, he uses it. The foundation of all mitzvahs." Earlier, he said similar, that Shema encompasses all the mitzvahs. So yes, that's explicit in Ayin Beis, that Shema is so central, and that's why Shema is the most famous and the most powerful prayer in that sense. Here he's explaining the unity aspect of it, which is, of course, the central theme. So the answer is yes. What you're saying is correct. Yeah.
I know you said before you don't want to talk now, but
well, let me just let him finish. Let Yitzchok finish. One second.
I'm sorry.
No, I was finished. I was trying to help Robin see why it's not just a study of Torah per se, although that too implies mitzvahs. But
the Ayin Beis, remember, is tefillah and Torah.
And Torah, yes.
And mitzvahs. So everything is needed. There's no such thing as only Shema. You don't only say Shema. We also do mitzvahs and we learn Torah. Right now, he's talking about Shema as the centrality. And I just said it's Yesod Kol HaMitzvahs.
Right. It's foundational, so that's where you start from. It's
No, if you're asking the question, why Shema, why is he not talking about Torah? Because he talked about Torah 50 pages back.
Right,
now,
Oh, I see.
that's what he's talking about.
I see. Okay, thank you.
And Shema does capture the mitzvah of Yichud. The mitzvah of Torah is to connect with God's mind. It's not per se. All mitzvahs obviously connect with God. But you're also not talking about tefillin here, Shabbos or kashrut or mezuzah or lighting candles.
Mhm.
But if you want, they all are ultimately connectors and interfaces. Yeah, go ahead, Rab Shlomo. What?
I know you said before you don't want to speak now about the difference between Jews and non-Jews, but in general, this explanation between the Nefesh Elikis and the Nefesh Abamis, the Nefesh Elikis cannot convince, explain to something that is not a Nefesh Abahamis.
Okay, so
if I'm
familiar,
not talking about goyim, stone. You talk to stone. It has nothing to do with that. This is because the Nefesh Abamis is stone.
You're asking about non-Jews now?
No, I'm asking Bichlal that
A stone doesn't have the mitzvah to love God. I mean,
okay. But my point is that the Nefesh Abamis, because it's Klippas Noiga, like that Rabbi saying in Perek Beis in Tanya, that is Klippas Noiga et Shayches to the Nefesh Elikis.
I said Goyim and the Jews and non-Jews I'll discuss at a later date. I have discussed it in the past. I even referred everybody to Likutei Sichos Chelik Gimel, volume 13, and a few times where you can look up the Rebbe's notes on it also. We'll talk about that. I'll discuss it in time. I don't want to discuss it now. But right now, for all practical purposes, he is talking about neshama, nefesh elikis of a Jew. But non-Jews we'll talk about in a different context, a different time.
Thank you.
Okay.